Scary story. The lantern-bearer Jonah Creed, maniac serial killer, in the fog-bound fishing hamlet of Greyhaven, Washington, where the Strait of Juan Fuca, churns cold and restless and lighthouses stand like lonely sentinels against endless gray. The locals began to fear a man they called the lantern-bearer. His name was Jonah Creed, 46 years old, keeper of the decommissioned Point Grey light for the last 18 years. Tall, gaunt, with a salt-streaked beard and eyes the color of sea glass. He lived alone in the keeper's cottage beside the tower, tending the automated beacon that no longer required a human hand. Tourists sometimes spotted him at dusk, walking the rocky shore with an old brass lantern swinging from his fist. Even though the light inside never burned, they started calling him the lantern-bearer after the first body appeared in November 2026. 22-year-old marine biology intern named Harper Finch. She had been studying tide pools near the point for her graduate thesis. Her body was found at dawn on the black pebble beach below the lighthouse, sitting upright on a driftwood log, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them as if watching the horizon. A vintage brass lantern rested in her lap, wick freshly trimmed, glass chimney spotless. Inside the lantern, her own severed tongue, floating in whale oil that still smelled faintly of the sea. Her mouth had been sewn shut with fine monofilament line and neat, even stitches. Cause of death, strangulation, but slow manual, thumbs pressed into the windpipe until cartilage cracked. The lantern's flame had been lit at the moment of death. Forensics found soot traces on her closed eyelids and the insides of her nostrils. She had inhaled her own final smoke. Second victim surfaced 3 weeks later, 28-year-old charter fisherman named Declan Moss. He ran night trips for lingcod out of Greyhaven Harbor. His body washed up inside the tide-scoured sea cave known as Lantern Hollow, propped against the damp wall like a man resting after a long day. Same lantern clutched in his lap, same severed tongue preserved in oil, his mouth stitched closed. This time the lantern wick had been soaked in something that burned blue-green, phosphorescent, like deep-sea jellyfish. When investigators opened the glass, the tongue inside glowed faintly, as if still alive with borrowed light. The town locked its doors tighter. Boats stayed in slips after sunset. Children were told the old lighthouse ghost story had come true. Third 19-year-old barista, named Rowan Hale. She worked the early shift at the Greyhaven grind, always humming sea shanties while steaming milk. Her body was discovered at the base of the lighthouse tower itself, sitting cross-legged on the concrete pad, back against the iron door, lantern balanced on her upturned palms like an offering. Tongue removed and immersed in oil, mouth stitched. This time the lantern contained not just the tongue but a small glass vial of seawater dyed crimson with her blood. The wick burned steady for 48 hours after discovery, impossibly long for the amount of oil present. Panic turned to legend. People said Jonah Creed had finally gone mad from years of solitude, that he collected voices the way the ocean collects shipwrecks. The FBI sent Special Agent Mara Voss, no relation to previous cases, just recurring coincidence. She arrived during a week of record high tides that flooded half the lower village streets. Mara interviewed Jonah at the lighthouse cottage. He invited her inside. The room smelled of kerosene, old books, and something metallic. A shelf held a dozen brass lanterns, each identical, each with a tiny brass plaque engraved with a date. "You keep lanterns," she observed. "Tradition," Jonah replied in his low, gravel voice. "Every keeper since 1887 carried one at dusk, even after automation." He offered tea. She declined. "You knew Harper Finch?" "Saw her at the tide pools. She asked about bioluminescence. I told her the sea remembers every light it's ever swallowed." Mara left with the chill of his stare lingering on her back. The fourth victim vanished before dawn the next week. 25-year-old documentary filmmaker named Lila Voss. Again the surname. Uncanny. She had been shooting a short film about forgotten Pacific lighthouse, her last known location. The path to Point Grey light at 11 p.m. Her body appeared at high noon on the public beach trail, sitting on a weathered bench overlooking the Strait, lantern in her lap, tongue preserved in glowing oil, mouth stitched. But this time the lantern held two tongues, hers and a second, older one, desiccated and dark. DNA later matched it to a missing woman from 2018. Jonah's estranged sister, presumed drowned after a fight with him. The pattern crystallized. Each victim had perfect vocal timbre, clear, melodic, carrying over wind and water. Each had spoken to Jonah in the weeks before death. Each tongue was collected to keep the light burning. Mara secured a warrant. They searched the lighthouse at midnight. The tower itself was empty, beacon automated, lens clean, but the basement level, sealed since the 1950s, had been reopened. Inside a workshop, lit by a single hanging lantern. Shelves lined with glass jars of whale oil, each containing a preserved human tongue suspended like specimens in amber. Labels handwritten in precise block letters. Names, dates, vocal ranges noted in musical notation. A small table held surgical tools, laryngotomy scissors, cautery pens, monofilament suture, and the lanterns. Dozens. Each brass body polished to mirror shine, each wick ready, each chimney etched with faint initials. In the center a large brass lantern, bigger than the rest, unlit. Inside its reservoir, a thick, dark liquid that shimmered with iridescence. A note beside it read, "For the final chorus." One last voice to guide the ships home. Jonah wasn't there. He had taken his skiff out into the strait at dusk. The Coast Guard launched search boats. Radar picked up a small vessel drifting 10 miles offshore. They found Jonah standing in the bow, coat open to the wind, the large lantern clutched to his chest. The wick burned bright, fed by something that refused to die. He looked at the approaching cutter, raised the lantern high. Mara Voss, aboard the lead boat, shouted through the bullhorn. "Jonah, put it down." He smiled, small, sad. "The sea needs voices," he called back. "Mine was never enough." He struck a match, touched it to the reservoir. The lantern erupted, not in flame, but in brilliant, unearthly blue-green light. Phosphorescence mixed with blood and oil. The glow spread across the water like spilled aurora. Then Jonah stepped forward. The strait swallowed him. They recovered the lantern the next morning, still burning, impossibly, on the surface of the waves. Inside 11 tongues now, arranged in a perfect circle around a final fresh one. DNA confirmed it was Jonah's own. Autopsy on the recovered body showed he had performed the same surgery on himself hours before. Tongue severed, cauterized, placed in the lantern while he still breathed. He had stitched his own mouth closed with trembling hands before walking into the sea. The preserved tongues were removed, buried separately in unmarked graves along the shore. Greyhaven still hears singing sometimes. On nights when the fog is thick and the tide high, fishermen swear they see a blue-green glow moving across the strait. Slow, steady, like a lantern carried by an invisible hand. And if you listen close, very close, you can hear faint layered voices rising from the water. Not screams, not pleas, just wordless melody. 11 women, 1 man, guiding lost ships, eternal. Check out my long videos with scary stories, visit my channel and watch. Subscribe to my channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, recommend it to your friends. Check out my videos, friends.